Okay, also, can I please introduce on stage Dimitrios Buhalis. You saw him as he wanders on here. Takes his
Going at the end.
You met him before. Similarly, you met before Ken Osei, who is just there to my left, Principal Investment Officer from the IFC, and just behind me, I believe this is Tony Matharu. Hello. Chairman, Integrity International Group Limited, and an old friend. I've just seen her. Ibrahim, Chief Executive Officer, Energy and Environmental Alliance. Christopher, it's all yours.
Don't give me the hard questions, whatever you do.
Well done, everyone who's hung in there. It's always encouraging to see more people in the audience than there are on the panel. Seeing if anyone's awake. When we labelled this discussion, delivering growth in the UK tourism sector, I think we'd all hoped that we'd be building on the much-trailed growth programme of the new Labour government. As it turns out, to date, this appears to be more aspiration than substance. Meanwhile, our sector is reeling from the impact of higher employer national insurance, higher minimum wages, changes in employment law, and an uncertain future for the lower business rate regime. Hopefully, the government will soon realise how significant tourism is as a source of employment, particularly for young people. The continually revolving door of tourism ministers. In the 10 years that I was chair of Visit Britain, I had 19 ministers and secretaries of state. We'll just have to go on making the case. But I wanted to say that before we got to the discussion on the panel, because we're not here to be moaning minis today, but rather to take a longer-term view and identify which UK tourism sectors look attractive for investors and how best to secure the capital needed to maintain and improve our offer, thus ensuring that tourism continues to contribute to the investment and growth objectives of the nation. Last couple of points. As a nation, we're not novices in the tourism industry. Domestic travellers already account for 340 million bed nights a year and spend an estimated 180 billion on tourism, while overseas visitors contribute a further 44 billion, with close to 300 million bed nights, 50% of which are in London and never go outside. We all know that nowadays tourism is more and more about experiences. What I find interesting is that in a recent survey that identified the top 20 destinations in the UK, 3 were natural beauty, 6 were historic buildings, and 11 were built attractions, underscoring the view that there is no limit to the opportunities for entrepreneurs with an exciting vision. And given the evolution of the accommodation sector, there is surely room for new build and renovation. The question for now is, where do we go from here? Or maybe to be more precise, where do our customers want us to go from here? Fortunately, we have an expert panel to help us answer these questions. Ofi, Ken, Tony, and the Professor. So I'd like to start by asking each of you to lay out the case, briefly in an elevator pitch, for investing in the UK tourism sector. Where would you put your money now and why? Dimitrios, you have an independent view of consumers. Would you like to start?
I think what's happening now is that you find consumers being polarized. On the one side, you've got the people that have got quite a lot of money, that they're actually not affected by the inflation, by a lot of the financial struggles. And then you've got the vast majority that they are now struggling with surviving the month. I've never, in the last 34 years I live in this country, I've never had so many offers that they're related to payday. And therefore, what's happening now is that you've got a whole range of people who cannot afford our services in tourism, hospitality, and leisure. And that's really, really important. First time that has ever happened. And I think that also creates opportunities for investment, because there are a lot of properties that they are now available out there. And anybody who has got a little bit of cash on that can invest, this is the right opportunity to invest on things.
Two-tier market.
Yeah.
Invest in the winning tier.
Yeah.
Described. And in what?
invest on things that have got to do with experience and things that have got to do with well-being and wellness. We find a lot of people are focusing now about their well-being and their wellness. One of the things that you find that they're expanding really, really fast is pet shops and anything to do with pets. You find a lot of people that they are investing, that they are spending a lot of money on pets and different things that they're not buying things, they're not purchasing things, but they are purchasing experience, or they are purchasing things to do with their well-being.
Tony, you're at the sharp end of delivering what consumers want, and you have a desire, I know, to keep building the business you've got. Where would you put your money and why?
I think the flippant answer to that would be in the public sector, because that's where all the money seems to be borrowed from private sector and spent on the public sector. But I think a more realistic answer, it relates to tourism, is where there's disruption, there's opportunity. So whilst COVID and the post-pandemic lockdowns have impacted lots of people, and the reduced working week has impacted negatively on workforce and mobility of people coming in, particularly into urban environments and cities, which has meant that it's less practical and returns on investment for offices have weakened. There are opportunities as a result of that to reinvest in those businesses which are probably buildings which have been unloved, and repurposing them into other hospitality-related ventures, in particular hotels. So whilst disruption has been uncomfortable, whilst London as a capital city depends on many people coming for all kinds of reasons, events, work, culture, arts, to visit, as you said, the heritage facilities, particularly in and around London. And that's been an unhappy situation for those who are holding large real estate in offices that needed large amounts of capital expenditure. There are opportunities to identify relevant buildings and repurpose them as potential hotels and deliver to the market what the 21st century consumer might want, including experiential lifestyle offers in new locations, sometimes in fabulous buildings that were built for a different time, for a different purpose, but can be repurposed.
So both of you saying in the dark spots, there are light spots.
That's what entrepreneurs do. Entrepreneurs typically watch patterns of behaviour, stock market, mining, minerals, you might be an expert on that. And when they see blips in the market and they see changes in that pattern, having identified it, presumably because you've got expertise on tin or copper or zinc or hotels or travel or buildings or real estate, if you are able to identify those and see that there may be some value to be created from them, then you might then want to buy into those in a way that perhaps others would not. So typically entrepreneurs are optimistic and they're scanning the horizons for opportunity. It's selecting the right opportunity. There are obstacles, many of them, largely because there are big barriers to entry. I'm sure you'll come on to that as another question later on. But generally, and in an elevator pitch, where there's disruption, there sometimes are opportunities.
Thank you. Ken, you've lent a lot of money to a lot of people, evaluated a lot of oppositions.
Well, on this subject, I consulted my expert, my teenage daughter, who is studying hospitality and tourism management and business. And she doesn't live in the UK, so...
That's not the answer.
You'll have to take that with a bit of... But I think, I mean, on a very serious note, what she pointed out, which I think is really compelling, is that United Kingdom, historically, is the country that has been big on sports, so cricket, football, rugby. These are all sports that the Premier League is one of the most popular leagues in the world. Music, big destination, United Kingdom, in terms of different types of music, different genres. Heritage sites, architecture, cathedrals, everything from old buildings, castles, the whole food scene. United Kingdom is a big hotbed of markets, agricultural tourism. So basically, I mean, the recommendation is to capitalize on the existing assets of the country and turn them into experiences. Create destination and tourism management companies around that. But really to just kind of unlock the existing assets and experiences. I mean, you know, concerts, people coming to the country, but creating a mechanism or means for people to access these facilities, organize them, transport them, provide accommodation around these themes. So really exploit the already existing assets. Everything from pubs, you know, pubs as an experience. I mean, whiskey, gins, these are all parts of the United Kingdom's culture and heritage. And that these are experiences that people will want to, if packaged correctly, would want to take advantage of.
I'm pleased to be able to tell you that the 8th most popular tourist destination is the Bombay Sapphire Gin Exposition. You're on the money. Thank you. Ulfi, you have a lot of experience in many sectors of the industry and also have a lens now as to the kind of industry that it should be. What would you want to see?
Well, I think I'll reflect on, first of all, for those of you who don't know, we're a coalition. We represent investors, and our investors own about 40,000 hotels around the world, including many in the United Kingdom. What are we spending our money on at the moment? Well, I think I would agree with Tony, definitely looking at repurposing, because location, and what better location than office buildings right in the center of town, which are, you know, now in need of loving business care. But also with the environmental hat on, and I'm very sad that I didn't actually hear enough from all the ministers that spoke today about longer term vision and sustainability about their destinations. With that sustainability hat on, I think it's fair to say that what investors are currently looking for, institutional capital, so pension funds, LPs, but also private equity, what we're looking for is we're looking for the opportunity to actually transition existing assets, existing built assets, so existing hotels, to become more sustainable, because there's a lot of profit to derive from that transition. Why are we doing that? Because of regulation. Regulators tell us that we have to be net zero by 2050. Well, actually, in 2050, 80% of all the buildings that will be here are already here, and they're all expected to become net zero. So one thing is to think about where to put your money in terms of developing new destinations, new buildings, new hotels. But actually, an opportunity that we often overlook is to think about how we can improve existing assets. And we have a very compelling reason, assuming we all buy the climate argument, being that COP is happening in Baku as we speak. So I think that's where I would definitely put my money, and that's where a lot of investors are putting their money, in saving and transitioning assets, because if assets don't meet the required level of energy efficiency and carbon performance, according to regulation, such as countries like the United Kingdom, if we don't meet the EPC rating, we can't operate them. If we don't meet the minimum energy efficiency standards, we won't be able to operate those buildings commercially. And that type of regulation is going to catch on. The European Union is definitely leading the charge. Who knows what will happen if, you know, the US elections go one way or the other. But globally speaking, the International Financial Reporting Standards Organization, which represents all the capital markets around the world, the central banks, the stock markets, 130 securities commissions with whom we work very closely to set reporting, financial sustainability reporting standards. And that's what investors are looking for: auditable, verifiable data and information to make good, sound investment decisions. All of that relates to us being able to operate assets, otherwise they become stranded. We could end up with a lot of stranded assets. According to the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor, which was created by the European Commission, if you put hotel buildings into that globally, on average, 99% of all hotel assets are already stranded. Theoretically, a stranded asset has very little value. So we have a long way to go, and that's where I would put my money.
Tony, what barriers exist to delivering the vision that you described, and how could people outside of the market, maybe government, either help by doing things or help by getting out of the way?
That's a really interesting question. When I looked at the topic, I looked at the meaning of growth. And there were three common elements about growth. If you take a baby, if you take a seedling, the genetics, the nature of the seed, that's one important factor. Nutrition and the environment. Those were three things that are common to the definition of growth. And growth was a quantitative thing, and it meant you could measure it, and it was smaller and grew bigger with nutrition and the right environment. So I think the answer is it can be answered in several ways, but very broadly. The genetics are good. For example, you mentioned London, 50%, around about 50% of the reasons, of the top 20 reasons for coming to the UK were heritage, attractions, and our history and our culture. So obviously London has a lot of advantages. So let's assume that the genes are good. UK is good, it has good genes. So what else do we need? Well, we need the right environment and the right nutrition. My thoughts are that there are lots of hindrances for that. With growth, it's a structural matter. With development, it's quantitative and also qualitative. So the quality of you can talk about development, but when you just simply talk about growth, it's simply about how big it gets, the size of the market, and so on. So my thoughts are that we need to create the right environment, the right conditions, the right nutrition for the UK's good genes to be exploited. And that means that private investors have got to be able to and want to risk take to invest their own capital in order to get a return on investment and to create gross value added at the end of the investment. Other people, the debt market, conventional banks, corporate lending, others, institutional finance, they want to get a return on their investment. And they've got to be encouraged that there will be consistency and stability in the marketplace in order for them to get their returns. So those things, the conditions and the environment really are government-led things. They're not they can't be controlled by individual organisations. They could potentially be influenced by collectives. The IOD, the CBI, UK Hospitality, Company of Entrepreneurs, London Chamber, and family business organisations and collectives can influence government, and in my view should, in order to make sure that the conditions are right for both private enterprise and foreign investment to want to invest its funds in the UK economy and in UK tourism. But we can't be complacent. It's just because London and the UK have been successful, it should not mean that we can keep on taxing it and we can impose restrictions and regulation and everything will be all right. We've learned that that isn't the case. So very broadly, I think we've got to create the right environment, the right conditions. We've got to nurture it, support it. We've got to try to encourage people to be in their workplaces. We've got to encourage employers to employ more people. We've got to reduce the restrictions on employment. We've got to reduce the barriers to entry. They're hard enough already. And when there's nervousness and insecurity, the markets respond and they don't want to lend and they hold back. We don't want that.
Ask Osei to just have a perspective on that, because you've been doing quite a lot of the lobbying and you know what works and what doesn't. And then Dimitrios and Ken, I'd love you to just, I suspect, close out, because we're tight on time, by commenting on what you've observed in other places that we might learn from, things that have worked elsewhere. So Osei, how do you actually get the consensus to land?
Well, I think the power of local is very important in the United Kingdom. So, we have over 600 members of parliament. Each one are responsible for constituencies. There are tourism, hotel, service department facilities in most of those 650 constituencies in the United Kingdom, and the power of local lobby should never be underestimated. So how you organize that as a collective, I think, is very valuable. but I do believe that sometimes representative organizations focus too much on having simply or merely having lobbyists within the parliamentary building, for example, and forget about the most important thing, which is the people that live in the constituencies actually saying to their local MPs, this really matters to our local economy, our local people depend on these jobs, our local economy depends on this income, on this revenue, on these exports, on this investment. That, I think, should never be underestimated, the power of that. And just one final comment about the United Kingdom, since that's what we're talking about, although, just to be clear, I do represent a global constituency now. But for the United Kingdom, I think it's quite sad to see that a tourism investment conference is happening here, opposite Westminster, and this room is not full of members of parliament from the United Kingdom. We have lots of representatives here who have come from other countries to the United Kingdom, and I feel almost ashamed that we haven't given them a proper welcome as the United Kingdom government. Well, I don't work for the government, but I have worked with government long enough. So I apologize for that. And I do think that next time we should make a very particular effort to actually ensure that there is more diplomacy, if nothing else, on part of the United Kingdom government. They should be here.
I have to just hit Dimitrios to go next. I have to make one comment.
Yes.
When I was chairing Visit Britain, I went to see Ken Livingstone, who did not love Visit Britain. And he said, what do you think I think of tourists? And I said, I don't know. He then gave me an unrepeatable announcement, a comment, but it was attached to the phrase, they don't bloody vote. And it's a real reinforcement of your point. And I remember you and I talking many years ago about the fact that one of the lines we were able to use one election or two elections ago was 70 or 80 members of parliament would lose their seat if the people who are involved in tourism in their constituency voted the wrong way. Yeah. And they were very small numbers, but very high leverage.
Well, may I just come back on that? Because I just want to illustrate a positive example, and also picking up on the Premier League. So when I was the chief executive representing the industry here in the United Kingdom, lobbying the United Kingdom government, working very closely with Christopher and other colleagues. And our most successful lobbying effort, where we had MPs actually queuing up and fighting over each other to participate, was when we did a project called the Big Hospitality Conversation. Now, that was the brainchild of the then chief executive of Premier Inn Hotels. His name was Patrick Dempsey. He was the MD there. And he had the brainchild that we should actually work proactively with the Ministry of Economy and also with the Minister of Employment to drive a proactive jobs growth program. And it was very successful. My colleague Julia is here, who worked with us, and she was in our team. And the government actually seconded staff to work in our office, which was amazing. And the reason they did that is because we partnered with Premier League football clubs. So we worked very closely with Tottenham Hotspur, which it hurts me to say because I'm an Arsenal fan. Highbury born and bred, but never mind. We worked with Chelsea, we worked with Liverpool, we worked with all the big Premier League football clubs, Newcastle. Still no? Because Tony likes cricket. And so we had an event, for example, together with Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, and the power of the Premier League Football Club to bring in young unemployed youngsters was phenomenal. We had 2,000 unemployed youngsters in Tottenham that turned up to the stadium to meet with hospitality employers to get a job in hospitality. Of course, we did a lot of promo. They brought in some players. But the reality was that we had MPs queuing up outside the stadium who hadn't even been invited, who wanted to be there to be in the photo. So we found that to be a very powerful program.
Thank you, Ophir. Think about your customer, not just what you want to say, but what they need to hear. Dimitrios.
If you are thinking about growth and if you are thinking about investment, I think you need to think about people, and Tony and Ufi have already mentioned that, and it's really about the young talent. And coming out of Bournemouth University, where we're teaching undergraduate students, postgraduate students, we've got so much expertise on how we can prepare the young guys for the new environment. Having said that, the neglected you find both from the public sector and the private sector, with a few exceptions like Tony and Ufi and several colleagues that we've worked with very closely. It's phenomenal. You find in medical science, in engineering, in different areas, people are coming to find out the latest research and adopt it and take the students straight into their jobs. Very few people in tourism and hospitality are doing that. And that is something that is actually restricting growth. Growth is not only about the investment in terms of money, but it's also the brains that are going to bring innovation, the innovation that are going to take things forward, to bring the new talent into the industry that's going to create the innovations. You asked me about the global situation. In the UK, we don't respect tourism so much. We think that this is one of these things that is, it's not a proper industry. In other places around the world, you don't have that choice because you don't have so much other industry. So if you're in insular regions or if you're in the periphery, you really need to invest in tourism, and you know that from day one. Having said that, the COVID situation and different situations before should have alerted us to the impact of tourism that has got in the regions, and especially the minute that you go out of the big centers where you've got a lot of other activities, it's evident. Cornwall, for example, in the south, in many different places. So this an opportunity to actually, and it's an invitation to work with both the public sector and the private sector to develop the talent for the future and to create the innovations that will empower that growth. Because unless Tony has got the right managers into place and the right people, you cannot really develop, you cannot really go. And many places around, you find that they operate limited hours, or they don't operate in full capacity because they don't have enough people to actually support their growth. Not only in the UK, in other places as well, but in the UK it's a particular issue.
Ken.
Well, I think maybe sort of to close out on a positive note, right? If you look at the United Kingdom, right, let's take cricket. Started in the United Kingdom, played around the world, watched by probably 2 billion people. Question is, how will they come and watch it here? So you need to create access, visas, ease of entry for people to experience it. The same with football. If you go around the UK stadiums, you'll find fan clubs from around the world, all of whom would like to experience their home team either in the stadium or at a pub nearby. There's a lot of food that is uniquely UK. Cumberland sausages, how do you make them? People wanting to experience where their cheese comes from. But how do you get them to the country? The other issues around getting the price point. Also borrowing some ideas from other countries. I mean, the UAE has been phenomenal in creating access. What is Dubai? It's a place in the desert. What's Singapore? It was basically a stop somewhere between Europe and Australia, but it's been completely transformed into tourism destinations. So creating a magnet that people can get to and experience. Experience tourism is one of the biggest growth sectors within tourism. So people travel to experience new places, to experience new things. So creating basically the mechanism to allow people to access it. And that's something that government can play a major role in facilitating.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much indeed. I think I've delivered you on time to the next session. Do you thank the audience?